I think because we might be having a fair bit of mix in the audience, people who are new to gamification and people who are quite experienced at it. I thought it's a good idea to kick off our conversation by talking about what gamification is according to you, and you know what's its most immediate relevance to business.
That's a good question. Like that. Its most immediate relevance to business.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think there's two aspects to this. So before we even define it, the reason why it's important or has become important is businesses notice that the world of games and video games particularly um, makes a lot of money, like more money than films and books put together. But more importantly, people who play video games and games spend hours, hundreds of hours playing them. They're super engaged with that world. So something about games is super engaging. And to be fair, that's what we want as business. We really just need to grab people's attention, grab their eyeballs, grab their attention, and use that to further the purposes of our organizations. That's why we're in business, isn't it? So that's why it's important. It's because people have seen the success of it, and they're like, one core definition of gamification, not in the academic world, it would be just like looking at games and stealing the bits that really work and seeing if we can apply them in other situations. So I guess the most academically used definition is similar to that, which is the use of game elements in non-game contexts.
Right.
Yeah, but my preferred one is actually from Kevin Wareback, which is gamification is the process of making activities more game-like. And I like that because it's a bit more of an instruction. It's what we've got to do. It's
That's the
less about
finished
the
line.
academic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what do I actually do day to day? That's the bit. That's the excitement. That's the fun bit.
Right.
Making them more game-like. And from a practical point of view, all gamification is actually taking motivational theories that are already out there, the research that's out there in neuroscience and motivational psychology, and it gives us a practical framework for actually applying that to the real world.
Right.
And that's why it's really powerful. I think my very first or second customer was the head of the professor of psychology at the University of Surrey at the time. And I was like, why am I teaching you this stuff? He was like, oh, I know the theory, but I don't know how to apply it. And that's why I like
Right.
gamification. It's fun, but also practical.
Right. So it's what you're saying. One of the things that I heard you say is that it's almost like the businesses are kind of envious of the game companies. Like, look at that engagement. We want some of that. How can we get it? Right? It's
Yeah,
almost like they have it, we don't have it, but we want it too. So what can we do? What can we pick up from that domain and bring it into our business domain?
absolutely. When I first saw the word gamification, I had a team of people using my in-house CRM, customer relationship management system. And then I looked at a game and I was like, well, they're using that for 100 hours a month and they're paying to use it. I'm paying these people to use this software and they don't want to use it. Yeah. So, yes, I was very jealous.
That's a very funny contrast, but it's quite painful to businesses, isn't it? they
Absolutely.
they
Do you
they
know what's
buy
the
or
worst
build.
thing? The worst thing as a business owner is spending money on something that's supposed to further your business and then no one uses it.
Right. Yeah. So because you have been around for now almost a decade, that's a long time. You must have spoken to hundreds of executives and managers and people trying to bring behavioral change in their employees and in their organizations. When you mention gamification, so first of all, how does it happen? Do they reach out to you because they already know that you are in gamification, or is it that gamification comes up in the conversation naturally, and what's their reaction to that?
Okay, so I have a mix anyway. Because I've been around a while, I have a lot of inquiries and people reaching out to me. So then it's very easy because obviously they're already interested in gamification and what they're trying to do is find out if it will solve their main requirement, their business issue that they're faced with. In which case, it's an easy conversation.
Right.
But I've done a lot of talks at conferences and workshops, and I particularly like doing them at non-gamification conferences because I like spreading the word. And so there you've got people who potentially have never heard of the concept before. And I've done it with a lot of senior level directors and board members over the years, and there's a mix. Okay, I find it's about 50-50 where they're just straight interested. That sounds
Yeah.
great. I love playing games. Tell me more. I'd like to bring this. Can we build a whole playful culture in this company? They just go for it.
Right. Right.
The other 50% haven't come across it necessarily, and their business is a serious thing, so they're really not
Right.
sure why games and fun would be a good mix for them. But
Right.
for both sets, it always starts a conversation. So I've never not been able to speak to someone about gamification. They either start from not knowing or being anti it or being for it, but there's always a chat because it's interesting.
Right.
And so in that respect, I've got no issues with the word gamification. I think it always starts a conversation, and that's how we build rapport and start finding out what people want from life and business. It's through
Right.
conversations.
And do you find some resistance sometimes, Pete, in people who, actually starting from the point you mentioned that it's business is serious, whereas games are fun. That's the typical, the most immediate thought that kind of occurs to people. So, can you share any interesting turnaround in the conversation where, initially there was a bit of resistance or hesitation, and then over time, it changes and they become very much pro?
There is quite often resistance with, say, like 50% of the executives at a business. Right? That 50-50 split tends to be not just different organizations, but within the same organization. And the best way I've found to turn it around is I nearly always run some sort of event, workshop, a gamification 101 session for the senior leadership team. And the first thing I do, if I can, is get the most senior person in the room to play a game in front of everyone else. Okay? They are then reminded that it was fun to play because everyone grew up playing games. So it's just like restarting that element of the brain that goes, oh, yeah, I've been serious for 20 years, but I remember this now. This was fun.
Yeah.
Okay? And then it also gives permission to everyone else in the room to have fun because the most senior person's done it. And I guess the best example of this, or one of the ones I really remember well, was for a large organization in Cairo in Egypt. And the CEO was in the room, and everyone was just like pretty quiet, shall we say. And then he just came out and said, like, oh, I played that game you recommended to me last night with my wife. It was a lot of fun. I tripped over. I really injured my ankle. It was a very physical game. And everyone was just like, whoa, this is our CEO. He's not a robot. He's not an automaton. He's actually someone who's played a dancing game last night, had a lot of fun. And from then on,
Yeah.
not only did that workshop go better, but there were multiple others, and word had always spread that it supported right from the highest level. We're allowed to have fun in the cause of business, and just makes such a big difference. I can't tell you how many
Yeah.
senior leaders I've made play games like Plants vs Zombies in front of other people, and it just works really well. People like playing. It's what we have evolved to do as a method of learning. And honestly, the
Right.
world of business drums the love of play out of us if you're not careful.
Right.
And so we can turn it on again. And that's what I like.
I think that's a significant takeaway already from this conversation, that it's a part of us as human beings. It's almost like we have it, but we are not using it. We have somehow kind of kept it in the background, and we just try to be all stiff and tight in
Yeah.
business. Whereas there is no need to do that. You can bring the full person into the business, right?
Absolutely. So like play's the state we need. That's the fun. That's where the neuroplasticity increases so we can change behaviors. And games are the design framework, how we can tell
Yeah.
people it's safe to play. So gamification
Right.
is then about taking games and safe places into the real world. So now it's safe to play at our job or at this
Yeah.
task or at this new behavior. And that's how it links. But play is that essence that we're trying to trigger.
That's the part we are trying to tap into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now coming to our audience, Pete, most of them are actually from the world of product or from marketing. And a significant part of, these two are like partners in crime, because one of them builds it, the other has to you know take care of promotions and consumption, right?
Hmm.
And so that's the audience mix we have today. So when they, suppose, not everybody has access to Pete Jenkins, right? So if they need to figure out something on their side, how do they come to the conclusion, is gamification for my product or not? How good a fit it's? Can you give some tips or some questions which our audience can take back?
Well, I guess at heart, what you need to know is whether gamification could work is the first thing. And an easy way to think of this, I think, is that gamification is useful wherever you need to change a behavior, like increase a certain behavior or decrease it. So, for instance, one of my clients is a water company, and one of their missions or needs is to get people to reduce their water consumption. So that's like a decrease a behavior. And then
Yes.
most other customers, particularly in the marketing, it's like increase a behavior, like increase how long they spend in the app, increase how many things they do in it, increase how much they buy from us,
Yes.
that sort of thing. So if there's a human element to it and a behavior that needs to change, then there's a chance gamification is going to be useful. So, for instance, with a marketing campaign, the behavior might be to just flag up the brand, build a brand experience, so that when someone comes to buy that product at some point, they'll choose your brand over someone else's. So gamified marketing campaigns can be quite useful for that. They're
Right.
a fun way to build brand experiences and build a little memory and link that you can trigger. And then
Yeah.
I guess my personal interest that I will fall towards is actually longer term stuff like loyalty schemes. Because how do you engage a customer and keep them loyal for the long term is a
Right.
really interesting challenge. If I speak to a room of people and I say, "What do you have the loyalty cards for your supermarket chain?" They'll go, "Yeah," and then I'll ask, like, "Well, do you have it for all the supermarket chains?" And then everyone will go, "Yes, I've got all three or all four." But they're
Yeah.
not loyal, are they?
That's an interesting thought. So if you have a bunch of cards, then you're essentially not loyal to any one of them exclusively.
Yes, it's not loyalty, is it? It's
Right.
so loyalty is going to be about how you keep front of mind as a brand when someone's making a purchase or using your service, whatever it might be. And that I think is a really interesting challenge because I've worked with a car rental agency with 400,000 customers, but their average customer interaction was only maybe 2 or 3 times a year when they needed to rent a car. So, but they want a loyalty scheme that will work all the time, and so that they're front of mind at that one moment each year when they do want to rent a car, they've got to rent it from us. So there
Right.
was very much more around campaigns of interest and engagement, and in the local area. Um, so like almost a different point system. In fact, they did run two different point systems. One with your normal loyalty points from spending money, and another one from engaging with the brand that you could maybe transfer between the two.
Right.
But that was all about like building experiences that just make you remember the brand.
Automatic, like one of my favorite examples is, if somebody says jogging shoes, the first thing that occurs to me is Nike, right? They've kind of got into that top of the set of companies that can satisfy that requirement.
Yeah, but by being front of mind, you're saving people a bit of mental processing power, aren't you? They're like,
Exactly.
I need to buy some running shoes. Okay, I played the Nike Plus app. That's the one that springs to mind. They're obviously the running ones. Yeah.
Right. Pete, when you talk about marketing and gamification, how much of gamification have you seen before the purchase, when you are building that whole brand familiarity and that, getting to know what we stand for, etc., and gamification after the purchase, or in fact gamification to induce a purchase? Somebody is on the website and they're basically looking all over. Now how can you try to make them purchase, right? That's a
Yeah,
big thing on the top of a lot of marketers heads.
it is, isn't it? I would say most of the flashier, nicer looking, pretty gamification, yeah, is all in that pre-purchase about the brand. Yeah. Then there's quite a lot of more what I'd call more serious gamification once you're a customer. So like points, discounts, learning about the products. How do we, just keep people using our product and buying more. And it doesn't tend to be as fun, I would say.
Right.
And then you've got a few good examples of people doing it during the purchase process. But I would say you see less of that. People are normally more worried in the interactions I've had with people. They're normally more worried about adding extra steps to someone's purchase process, which is what gamification will do. Yeah, we're always adding extra obstacles to people to make it fun. Whereas what you're trying to do when you get someone to make a purchase is take out steps so that there's less friction, so they'll actually buy the product and finish the buying process. So that's probably the one place where you've really got two competing things pulling at what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's an excellent insight, actually. That because sometimes people want to do something different, let's say, at the point of purchase, but what you're telling us is think really carefully before you do that, because you're extending the time and even risking losing the customer, right? They might be distracted or something.
Yeah. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? You build a really good game, they're so engaged in the game, they forget to buy your product, you know?
Yeah, that's a very different result.
Yeah. They'll have a positive brand experience, but you'll go broke because you didn't sell anything.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Now, talking about industries or verticals, Pete, what would you say that almost every industry or every vertical out there has examples of successful gamification by now? When I say by now, because it's been a while since gamification has been out there, and I think the longer it is out there, more chances that people come across that word and Google it or read about it. So, would you agree that almost every industry has one or two successful examples of gamification?
I mean, I keep thinking that, and then every now and then I come across a completely new industry that's just having one launch. I think, oh, it's a good idea. If I was to say one thing about what the future of gamification is in this
Mhm.
respect, is that it's just constantly broadening out.
Right,
So there are always new industries where people thought maybe that's not suitable for gamification, and then they've just thought of a way to do it. And I think this year is a particular one for broadening it out even more. From what I'm hearing, is there's enough people in the space now and enough organizations building gamification solutions or gamifying aspects of their products that it's reaching wider and wider audiences. And there's some amazing specialist stuff in very random spaces. You know, it all started with some fairly simple stuff, some marketing stuff, some gamifying call center stuff. Now you get some amazing. I had a talk at one of my conferences from someone who gamified a honey trap for hackers. So they have websites set up as a target, and then a hacker goes to it, and then they gamified it to make it a bit more challenging as they stayed on there longer. And the longer the hacker stayed on it, the more they learned about them, where they were, and the type of algorithms they were using and software and so on. That's
that's
really
very
specific, right?
yeah,
But an amazing use of it. And then you start seeing these appearing in other sectors all the time. I mean, for me, the last 2 years have seen a massive uptick in the gamification and health space. Um, Previously, gamification and health was very much consumer focused, so like Fitbits, Nike Plus. Now there's an awful lot more going on in the actual clinical side. Yeah, you're being prescribed gamified health products, building
right,
stuff for physical health, mental health, rehab. Um, Just I now run a podcast in that, interviewing people who've done it. And some of these have been coming along for quite a while because it's slower in that space because there's a lot of testing to go through
right.
to get it certified. But that's like, not only has that been growing, but of course, because of COVID, it's spiked. There's a lot of things going on in that space. And the other one was, of course, with gamification and e-learning and education.
Right.
There was a lot of e-learning packages out there, and then COVID came along, and people saw that they didn't really work. You know, that people would complete the content but not actually change their behaviors. So it's about the gamification is now, particularly in online learning, about making it effective learning that actually changes people's behaviors and they do learn from it. And that, of course, spreads out. There's learning in every app. You're teaching your customers how to use the app. You're teaching them how to use the product.
Right.
teaching them to make better decisions of some sort. Maybe it's even as simple as teaching them which is the most sustainable option in terms of shipping when they buy something.
Right.
So all these things, broadening out. I mean, with my conference, it's 5 days long. We've got a day dedicated to learning and gamification, another one to health and well-being, one to managing communities, which is probably my favorite day because it's about scale and getting people to work
Yeah.
together, one for the customer experience and one for employee experience. But I also really need a day for sustainability as well, but I've run out of days in the week.
And I think off late we've been hearing a lot of interest from even the HR professionals, like you mentioned some time ago. I think it's one of your favorite areas where you are. Sorry, there's a power cut here.
Oh,
Yep.
but we
But
can
you can
still
still
hear
hear
you.
me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I'll speak out of the darkness.
That's cool. You're gamifying it, giving us a bit of suspense. Anything could be going on there.
Right.
What was your question? Can you remember it? Because you probably can't see it.
No. I can remember the question. It's about HR, gamification in HR. Uh, I for one have been receiving a fair bit of interest from people around me on how do we change employee behavior, uh, especially in very large organizations, geographically spread out, culturally spread out. They are in different time zones. And so, do you have any thoughts on that or any experiences in trying to apply gamification at such a broad scale?
I mean, I do. It's a big question. But if we took just like this vertical of gamifying HR and the employee experience, that sub splits down into different elements of the employee life cycle and the employee journey.
Right.
And we can now see there are gamification examples for employer branding, so pre-recruitment, yeah, learning about a
Right.
company before you even apply.
Right.
There are gamification, lots of different gamification platforms and games to play for psychometric assessment and basic skills and numeracy assessment and finding the right fit people.
Right.
Nestle last year were rolling out a gamified plan which had a couple of 100,000 potential recruits go through it, all trying to find people with what they called a digital mindset, which really was about handling change. They wanted to
Right.
recruit people who could handle change. And so there was a psychometric assessment going on to find those people. And in fact, I think they were even going to run it internally to find the people internally who needed extra training on how to get that digital mindset. So there you've
Right.
got pre-recruitment, recruitment. Then there's probably the easiest place to get started with gamification in a company is in the onboarding program. It's generally easier for a learning and development person or the HR person to take charge of it and gamify it, and they don't necessarily need as much budget because there's some fun things you can do.
Right.
And there's quite a few off-the-shelf products that don't cost much to help you along with that.
Right.
So onboarding is like you've got the boring stuff that's important, like where things are in the company, extranet, things like that,
Yeah. The
or the health and
policies and all
safety
that.
training.
Yeah.
But also you've got about fit with the company culture. And there's some great gamification you can do there. And that's where
Right.
you're starting to talk about how is it different in different geographies and regions.
Right. Right.
And following that, right, the other stuff that's happening in an employee experience is, there's health and well-being programs. There's training itself, e-learning and gamifying the training. There's innovation programs that I see quite a lot of gamification going on. So quite often they come to us for like, we need a culture of innovation. So how are we going to change people's mindsets about collaborating and innovating and solving challenges?
Right.
And then there's retention. So it just keeps going. The one warning I would have is if you recruit someone through a gamified method, such as gamifying the pre-recruitment or gamifying the onboarding, that recruit is going to expect a gamified experience holistically for the rest of their time with your company. So you've kind of got to think holistically about the whole employee life cycle. Otherwise, you might be
Right.
more likely to lose them at some point because their expectations are higher.
Yeah. It's like you've given them a taste of what it's like to get into the company, and they'll be expecting that pretty much consistently.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
And now let's pivot, Pete, to one of my favorite topics, and I think many audience also will connect with it, which is gamification applied to apps and websites. Because today's, right after COVID, especially the digital thing has just taken off. Everybody is building an app, everybody is building a website at the minimum, right? I mean,
Yeah,
most companies are having both of them. Some have at least one of them, uh, and so they and Google and Facebook and everyone has become so good at getting you traffic, getting you downloads, right? It's almost like that's a solved problem. Nobody worries about acquiring users anymore. You just pump money into the engine and it just spits out 5 million
yeah.
customers in no time, right? You just need the money, deep enough pockets. And one of their biggest challenges after the users arrive at these apps is how can we hang on to these people? And
Yeah.
it's a challenge because the attention window of the average person is now so low. So do you have any experience or thoughts around how do you grab people's attention and build out a good story so that they stay for a long time?
I would say 80% of my work at the moment is in this space, gamifying apps. So, for instance, a company I work with at the moment has, in effect, like an employee referral scheme app.
Right,
So, it's not, they're pretty good at getting people to download it. Yeah, they'll get a few points that work into money for downloading it and installing it.
right.
But then they actually have to get people to come back and use it a lot for it to be effective. Okay, and they've
Hmm.
got a huge
Yeah,
recruitment issue, so they need a lot of employee referrals. And so
right,
what's the big tips? There are different things that appeal to different audiences. Their audience is in the care sector. So what we've done is find ways to highlight the deeper meaning and purpose of what they're doing, how many people they're helping each time they recruit someone into the care sector. That's another, say, 10 people who are having a better life. So like
right,
highlighting that within the game features so that it's front of mind, like, oh, this is really important, rather than like just they already had like a badges, not a badges, a leaderboard type system for how many people they'd referred, which only appeals to some of them. Whereas actually, if you put that as a more of an indicator towards the greater good, it's more motivating.
right.
And what you said about the app and the website is quite an interesting one for this one. Oh, welcome back.
Right,
It's quite an interesting one for this because their app is focused at the employees, and then their website is focused at like recruiters. So it's more of a portal. So they have a different type of behavior needed in that one, but they've got to
right,
support each other. So if an employee does one thing over here and refers someone, you've got to make sure the recruiter then looks after them. And how are they gamified and looked after and encouraged to do that? And it makes it quite interesting. But there are you've got to really start from understanding who the players are in order to choose the right game mechanics to get that effect. Um, that deeper meaning and purpose might not work in another organization. So we're always looking at different ways to do that. But there's generally a way. If the product or service is doing something useful, then it should be possible to gamify it to make it more engaging without seeming really cynical to the end user.
right. So it's like you take something which is inherently valuable and it's already useful per se, just in its barest form, right?
Yeah, and
And then you,
maybe just through the game, you're just reminding people that it's valuable. That might be all you
right,
need. Yeah.
right,
So if you think about like fitness apps, they've got that quite easy because they're giving you the stats and you know it's valuable because it is your health. Yeah. But even then, sometimes they need to remind you what it's about. Yeah.
yep,
Oh, I did 10,000 steps every day for 3 months. Okay, well now I'm sort of used to seeing that. What does it mean? Has it lost its meaning now? What do I then remind someone of? Yeah. So how can I
right.
put that in the game?
So when you say players, I assume you mean users of these apps, right?
Yeah, I mean, if in doubt, I call them players because it's to remind us to make them have fun and engage. But they could be users, customers, patients,
Right.
shop workers, it doesn't really matter. So the generic term for me is player.
That's a good spin on. I mean, the words user and all are, they are not evocative. They don't actually tell you what to think about these people. You're like, okay, if he's a user, I guess I've just got to make them use something. But if they are a
Yeah,
player, I've got to make it interesting for them. So now there's a clear call for responsibility on my side to make it interesting for them.
yeah. So I mean, one of the tools I like using is the player journey, and there's a similar thing in marketing, like the customer journey. But
Right.
merely by doing it as a player journey, you are more likely to take them on an emotional journey, which is more engaging.
Yeah. But going back to one of your earlier comments, Pete, today, when you say businesses don't traditionally have not, opted in favor of creating emotion or an emotional response in their users, why is that? Is that a result of focusing too hard on the use case, or
I think it's just because businesses focus on numbers and practicalities,
right?
and emotions are not easily quantifiable. You don't necessarily know what it is what emotion you want to drive and generate in a customer. Some industries do. Insurance companies know they want to engender the emotion of fear in a customer, and then when I'm afraid, I'll buy some insurance to cover that fear off. Right?
Right.
But most other industries don't really know. I mean, this is where Apple did it quite well. They were like emotions of creativity, imagination, like all about the self. But
Right.
what is it for our industry? What is it for this industry? What is it for that? What's that emotion that you want to engender? And when I first speak to companies, they're normally like, "Oh, I don't know, trust, integrity, or something," and it's not that much fun necessarily. So
Yeah.
you got to think a bit more widely about the emotions that you want. But yeah, what your question was: do companies do it or not? And I would say they don't, because A, it gets lost in committees. B, they're thinking about numbers and practical aspects. And C, it's hard to measure. So how do you know if you're getting better at generating emotions in people? The closest we have is things like survey feedback about how happy our customers are, and that's one
Right.
emotion, and there's hundreds. Right?
Right.
Got an
Right.
image
That's
somewhere of loads of emotions.
you've got a list of them.
Well, I've got. I mean, there's loads, but I've got a tool I actually refer to every now and then. This is like an emotions wheel.
Wow.
Everything
Okay.
listed on that is a different emotion. Because actually, what people do as well when you start talking about this is they get stuck on the basics like fear, anger, love, and joy. But it's a much wider spectrum, and then the more interesting choices we can make, the more interesting the game we can make. I had this client in Egypt. They wanted people to use the stairs more than the lift. Okay, for
Wow.
fitness, and also efficiency. Actually, too many people were taking it even if it's just one floor.
Right.
And they chose an emotion. One of the emotions they chose for the campaign was romance. I want a feeling of romantic. And they were like, "How are we going to use this?" I mean, I think they were just challenging me, to be honest. Like, haha, this gamification consultant will not be able to use this. But actually, what we did is in the posters and things for this, the idea was, hey, if you're using the stairs more, you will have maybe more likely to have the body of your dreams and meet the partner of your dreams. So we
Right.
could actually convert it to that, and then the game made more sense. And it's a completely different emotion from what you would expect at a business,
Yeah. I'm
but
reminded
more
of this.
interesting.
I'm reminded of this subway somewhere in Sweden, Pete. I don't know if you've come across it. They encourage the subway travelers to not take the escalator, instead climb up the stairs.
The
And I
piano
think that,
stairs.
yeah, the piano stairs. They've converted the steps into the keys of a piano, and so people can now play melodies on that by going up and down. That
There's another version I've seen as well, which is the further up the stairs you go, some speakers are playing applause, and it gets louder and louder until there's a raucous cheer as you reach the top.
wow.
So yes, they've done exactly that. They've made it fun to do a thing that everyone probably knows they should be doing. Yeah, and you're just like pushing their behavior a little bit, so they're more likely to make that choice. But also, you're still doing it for good. So what's great about gamification, in my opinion, is if you aim for long-term satisfaction, long-term behavior change, you're automatically ethically going to do pretty good, because any negative behavior you encourage would eventually stop them wanting to play.
Right.
Like if you think about a game like Farmville a long time ago, you used to have to go back and water your fields every, say, 12 hours, or they'd wilt and fade away.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
this is a really powerful game mechanic in the short term, but after you've woken up in the middle of the night a few times and ruined your sleep, you start to feel bad about the game.
Yeah.
And then you've got a negative effect on it. Whereas if you design that for long term, you would have designed that differently.
Right.
Um,
I've heard of this term called black hat gamification. Is that kind of what is
yeah, so
happening
that's a
there?
good example. Okay. And what they do say, rule of thumb, 90% white hat, 10% black hat is a good mix for gamification. It's a bit like the carrot and stick. If we're putting a gamification solution into a corporate situation, you might well need to do a bit of stick to make people actually download it or play it or read the email about it in the first place. But once they're in, it should be pretty much white hat game mechanics to make it engaging and fun for the long term.
Right. And that's a powerful message that you're putting out there, because one of the things that we hear a lot in Upshot is concern around metrics, numbers, as you said, click through rates, open rates, conversion rates. And there is this number driven, it's almost like the marketer wears the number lens and wants to look at gamification with that lens. Can it increase my numbers? Can you give me an instant answer? Can you prove it to me? Have you done it elsewhere? It's a very predictable track that the conversation goes. And I think what you're calling out is that's probably not the right thing to do right at the beginning, even though that's the long term goal. You want to you want to reach those higher numbers by the right method or the ethical method. Am I getting you right?
I think so. But actually, you're not off to a bad start with those metrics. You just need to add some more about quality and also long term, something that represents the long term of it.
Right.
If we, okay, another power cut.
Yep. I'm so sorry on behalf of the
It's fine.
electricity board in the mountains here.
Yeah. So where was I? So the long term mix
The
within.
quality. You were talking
Yeah,
about
quality
quality
metrics.
metrics.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, it's like having the net promoter score of a customer who's signed up, not just the fact they signed up.
Right.
Yeah. So if you've got to add in some of those metrics for those people as well.
Right.
Otherwise, I mean, the worst case scenario is you're just recruiting the wrong customers, and eventually
Right.
your company will really struggle. So by
Right.
measuring the right things in the game, and the funniest thing is by measuring more stuff, we can make a more interesting game. So actually adding these extra measurements is a good thing.
Absolutely. And when you talk about implementing gamification projects, typically what do you see out there in the industry? Is it a build in-house, using your own development teams or contracting development teams, or is there a tendency to shop for off-the-shelf platforms? What's the trend out there?
Oh, and see, I find this bit really interesting because there seem to be three main ways people approach it.
Right.
One is building it in-house. What I like about that is quite often the team know a lot about your product or service already, and they're really passionate about doing something a bit different and a bit more interesting than their normal day-to-day job. So they actually,
Right.
sometimes when it's been built in-house, I've seen some of the most fantastic examples come out of it. But there's a downside. They've already got jobs, and if they're not given the resources and the time to work on the gamification, these are the ones where it might never get delivered
Right.
when it's in-house. So you've got the potential for something special, but also I would see more of them never happen. I got into gamification. My interest actually was in bringing these sort of games to the smaller to mid-sized business originally. So I was most interested to start with off-the-shelf platforms, stuff where we
Right.
could get something, customize it quick, get up and running, and basically impact more people faster. And I would say that's probably the cheapest way to do it, and it will always, nearly always, have more effect than not having done it. Yeah, so it's going to be a more positive thing.
So go
So
for an early win. Then.
yeah, go for an early win. This is quite a good way to like introduce it into an organization as well. We've used this off-the-shelf platform. We used it for this project. It saw an uptick of 17% in this, or this. Can we do something a bit bigger next time? Maybe we'll do it in-house.
Right.
And then what you see, particularly in marketing and marketing campaigns, is complete outsourcing of the game, because you want to find, it's got to be beautiful. You probably don't have all the skills in-house, and the platforms that are available might not be as customizable to your brand or to that particular emotional ethos, or the, the actual campaign you want to get across. So bespoke building is probably more expensive, but you're more likely to get what you want, although you've got to put a few extra things in place to make sure it does deliver what you want, because you've outsourced it.
Right.
But I'd say it splits between these three, and the companies I would invest in generally are the ones with platforms that have been gamified. So they take an existing business issue that they solve, and then they make it more effective. The magic sauce of the gamification goes in, and now it stands out compared to the competitors. It's an easy win.
Right. And over the years, what's been your favorite game mechanic among all the ones that I'm sure you've tried loads of them? What's your most favorite one?
It does depend on what we're trying to do.
If I could rephrase that, like specific to marketing, let's say on an app or website, considering our audience, what would that be? That kind of a mechanic which you'd
Okay.
like personally a lot.
I really like, I don't always get permission to do this with a customer, but I really like game mechanics which connect customers together. So they
Right.
might not even know each other, but they have to work together to achieve something in the game. Because one of the most powerful game mechanics of the lot is building social connections as a result of playing. You know, if you talk to people about their favorite games, particularly their board games, it's always going to be the social element. Like they play football because they like playing with other people. They play
Right.
this because they like meeting people. And so if that is my favorite to use, but I don't always get permission because sometimes it's quite hard. And sometimes in the health space, it's really difficult to do for data protection reasons,
Yeah,
to link people
privacy
together.
reasons. Yeah.
That's my favorite. The next one is probably narrative, story, rewarding people with more story as a result of their activities, getting people hooked on that. And my favorite example of that is not mine actually, but I've interviewed him countless times, is Zombies Run, which now
Right.
has been running like 8 or 9 years. And some of those players are still going 8 or 9 years later because they're just getting new story, new challenges, and it's really well written. And
It's
what a
almost like
great reward.
it's almost like a never-ending soap opera, right? It just keeps building and building.
Absolutely. You know, once they've spent some time with those characters, well, they've taken ownership of it. They're less likely to leave your app as well, you know, because they want to keep coming back to that one as opposed to any others. You know, it really does that loyalty thing because they're
Yeah.
invested in it.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. I was
if you
about
took
to
a
say that.
term, a buzzword, it would be like immersive and the metaverse, I guess. But immersive storytelling, immersive games are the most likely to lead to this. And it's a bit of work, but actually, story, we're natural storytellers, aren't we, humans? So let's put
Yeah.
some in our games.
So at this point, actually, I'm going to bring up a question we have from the audience because it ties in really nicely into what you just said about story and about creating this whole narrative and not just making it dry. So it's a question from I'm not sure how to pronounce the second name, but then the first name is Kata, CATA. So the question is, I've been in the gamification field for a while, and I've been struggling with the fact that we know that without the right design process, we are not going to be successful. But most customers don't understand that they are buying a process of design with specific goals to achieve, and they just want a ready-made product which is available off the shelf, right? So there is this tension between I want an immediate solution versus having to go through a conscious design process. I think that's what the person is asking. How do you recommend dealing with this in order to close more sales?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Gosh, so I mean, obviously, we use as a company our own gamification design process. And last week, I turned down an inquiry because they'd started with a different design process, and unless they were willing to pay to start again, it wasn't going to be a good fit for us. Okay, because it was definitely
Okay.
coming at it from a different angle and would have a different outcome, and I wouldn't be able to guarantee the results because I don't know. It's like starting with something random. But what I find is they're either really clearly in favor of an off-the-shelf, a platform that's already there or close to it, or they need some work done on what they've already got that's existing. And that's where it always has to have a design process, because you've got to understand what they've got, who their audience is, and the behaviors for it before you can design it. And yeah, maybe I lose some customers along the way on that, but I think it's worth doing so that you actually have a good end result.
Right.
The ones who don't go through that process, they just want to throw a game mechanic on the end of it. Yeah, it might have an uptick for a month or two, but then it will fade away, and then they'll be unhappy. So hopefully, I'm able to explain that to them. I think I'm quite lucky in that I seem to attract companies that need long-term behavior change. So then they
Right.
know they've got to think about it differently. In fact, quite often they've tried a few game mechanics as well
That's
these days.
interesting.
Yeah, we've stuck some points and badges and leaderboards in this, and it shows interest for a month or two, and then it just fades away. What's going on? Can you? And in fact, they'll start by just saying, "Can we fix that bit?" And I'll be like, "Well, the issue is probably that we need some different game mechanics."
Got it.
Good question.
Yeah. And there's also another question about the use of the upcoming technologies in gamification. For example, augmented reality, and this person is also asking about AI, and I think that goes to probably speak a little more about the data aspect. How do you use behavioral data, and how do you use, I think, technologies like augmented reality? So what's your take on that, Pete?
Well, do you know what? I'll refer you back to what we said right at the start. If in doubt, watch what the video game companies are doing. And so they're
Yep.
using machine learning and AI to gather more data and provide more personalized journeys for the players. So they might have 1 million players of a game, and every single one of those is experiencing it slightly differently.
Wow. Right.
And that's the point of AI and personalization, is about personalizing that player journey we were talking about. So one of my customers in the health space has a lot of AI built into their gamification app, and it fine tunes the routines for their rehab. It fine tunes how often they appear, and it's all based on their particular circumstances, but also how they progress or not, and
Right.
what they struggle with or not, or what they enjoy or not. And that's the bit I like about video games as well, is they will often pick up on, oh, actually, this person prefers more battles, or this person prefers more narrative, and then they'll divert you off to more of those kind of game elements so that you have a better experience. And they won't just stick you in those. They'll use that principle of uncertainty in games to occasionally give you something else. That was a book I recommended right at the start.
Right.
And so to keep it fresh, but like the majority of the time, they're going to give you the type of challenges you're most interested in. So you might get more puzzles to solve, or you might just
Right.
let you explore. There's that same game can do many different things for different people, but they can only do that by using AI and machine learning, because otherwise it just takes too much manpower
And
to make it
also,
happen.
in absence of a lot of automation and data, I think we also run the risk of trying to do something like one size fits all, right? We just try to run some experiment on, let's say, a broad base of users, and then get thoroughly disappointed that only a small percentage of them actually responded to that. And so there is this, in fact, it's one of the things that we face a lot in our work is, why is the engagement only 3%? Right. It's
Yeah.
because the real answer there is because a lot of people are maybe not really, it's not meant for them, but somehow they are part of the exercise, and so they're just naturally voting out, let's say. Right.
Yeah. So one of the things we do at Top Tips is just to build multiple player journeys for different types of people, for the different personas in marketing terms. Yeah,
Right.
it's a bit more effort. And the trick is to have some sort of game mechanic at the beginning that gives you more information about them and then sends them off down that track. So you don't necessarily have to go all in on the AI, although that makes life easier. But even if you've got, I've got a customer with like 6 avatars a player can choose from at the start, each with some different attributes. And the fact they've made that choice tells us something about them. And then they get a slightly different journey,
Right.
right? So there we've had to build 6 rather than 1, but maybe we've got, instead of 3%, 16%.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Because you're catering to people on their own terms, and you're not actually enforcing something on
yeah,
everybody and expecting, because that usually ends up in a lot of disappointments.
exactly. I mean, what's the best conversation? It's one where I listen to you and then actually give you what you're after.
Right.
Yeah. And a game that just forces you down one particular path doesn't necessarily do that. But it will work for a subset of people, the ones who are
Right.
interested in that sort of path, but
Right.
not everyone else.
Right. It's a very interesting balancing act, and I think it's pretty complex also, right? From what you've just said, it sounds pretty complex, and I think technology plays a big part in, because what I'm hearing you say is that the AI, or like, let's say whatever is the technology there, it is almost making a decision on the fly about each person.
Yeah,
What's
I mean, that's the
something?
ultimate aim, but I don't know of any of them that are doing that quite yet.
Right.
But it's more setting up the next challenge, like learning from what you've done. But I mean, games do this. They'll make things harder or easier on the fly based on how you're doing or how long. And it's certain algorithms you can build in, like, oh, they've spent too long on this particular level compared to other people. So it
Right.
can, and then you can give them a different option. Yeah, it's
Right.
an interesting alternative route, that sort of thing. And also, although I said like 6 journeys as an example, what a client might do is start with 2 and then add a
Right.
third one and then add a fourth one. It doesn't have to be all at once.
Doesn't have to be a big bang.
Correct. Just think
Yeah.
about it this way: the whole time you're just enhancing the player journey, and one other tip is really, it's not a build it and launch. It's a build it and continue that relationship with the customer, with the player.
Right.
So it's good to have some stuff you haven't built yet that's going to come out later.
Yeah. Even in fact, uh, one of the things that we did for a client of ours, the challenge was to continuously come up with things to keep them fresh, so that they never get bored. And even somebody who's been on the gamified journey for, let's say, 1.5 years, still has something to go after. Right. It's not like, oh, I've
Yep.
been there, I've seen everything, it's boring now.
That's why was one of the games mentioned in the chat right at the start, World of Warcraft. People have played that for years and years, and it's because they have to generate new challenges, new missions, and also there's like the playing with other people. There's an interesting quick win. I call it a quick win, but as soon as you involve other players, it's automatically more interesting because you don't know what other people are going to do. That's why if you play the same board game multiple times, but with different people, you have a completely different experience. And so that one of the reasons I like this connecting people thing is actually it makes our games more interesting and for longer, just by
Yeah.
involving other players.
I think some of the Chinese companies, I heard somewhere, I don't know if this is anecdotal probably, but I think Alibaba from China, I think they've tried some of these, collaborative quests, as they call them.
Mhm.
You've got to find a team that's willing to play along with you, and then you chase this particular target. And then if your team makes it, then all of you walk away with an insane amount of points. And
Yeah, and you see it in all sorts of games. One of my favorite examples about the size of team as well is the game
right.
Ingress, which is what Pokemon Go was built on. Okay,
I
Ingress was the
see.
one that came before it. But when you joined, you could choose one of either 2 teams. So each team had like 2.5, 3 million players, but it didn't matter.
Wow.
You were part of one team. And if you think about it, like, you might have millions of people supporting one sports team and feeling part of that team.
Right.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to split people up into like teams of 2 or 4. You can think quite big. and
But
still get quite a
that's
lot of
phenomenal,
benefits.
isn't it? I'm just wondering how it might be feeling to be part of a 2.5 million strong community. It must be quite a thing.
Pretty empowering, don't you think? It's
Yeah,
not just me and four others. There's a lot
it's
of
almost
us.
like an identity, right? It's almost like you vote for this political party or something like that. You just feel part of this massive group of people cheering for one thing.
Powerful stuff.
Yep. And I think that it creates so many social connections, that community aspect, that it's like the business job is made easier, right? Because now there are people talking to each other about the things that the business would want them to talk about.
Yeah.
Right. It's essentially that. All right, Pete. So we are coming to the close of this conversation. It's been an hour. Can you believe it? It doesn't feel like that. I think this is a topic which both you and I can pretty much go on. Um, any closing comments on what you would like our audience to really watch out for in the next 1 year, or start doing in the next 1 year? Because we are trying to usher in the future here. And I think there are a lot of people who are on the sidelines. They're shy. They're just thinking, is this for me? Is this not for me? How do I start? So, any closing thoughts?
Well, I've always got a few tips around this. First would be play a game that's not your usual type of game. Get out of your comfort zone and play something a bit different, because then you'll learn something about game design and different audiences and what they might like about things, particularly if you can play it with other people and see what they enjoy about it. Second up would be do a tiny project, something really small, like gamify the effectiveness of the next email, or the next like 5-minute element of a training course, whatever it might be. Gamify something about it and try it out and see what happens. Because actually, game design and gamification design is all about making people have fun, learn to play, and the best way to do it is actually seeing it in reality, not just from the theory. Yeah,
Right.
Understanding game design helps, obviously, and it might save some time eventually. But the first thing to do is just try some small stuff out, and it can be tiny. We gamified our business cards. Put a game on the back of the business card. It's not huge, but it's really effective.
Do you have a card to show us, Pete?
I knew you were going to ask me that. We'll end on this then. So I have, I don't know if you can see this, I've got a to-do list on the back of my business card. And the first item's already ticked, which is meet you in person. So obviously that predates COVID and lockdowns.
Right.
Okay, but in essence, there are different levels of challenge aimed at different types of player. Yeah, like invite me to speak at an event. You could tick that one because we've done that. That's on here.
Oh yeah.
Then my colleague Vasilis, I make my staff come up with theirs. He's got pretty much the same as mine, but it's displayed as a snakes and ladders board. So he has to carry a dice around, but if you land on the right one, you'll have to connect to him on LinkedIn or refer a friend.
What happens if the snake bites them?
Yeah. And then one of my interns, she created a scratch card. So if you want her email address, you have to scratch it off with a coin, or if you want her phone number. So you have to earn it.
Yeah.
You actually have to put some effort in to get the item. If you want to find out what her LinkedIn name is, there it is, scratch it off. And so here we've got something really tiny, a business card, but you can gamify it in multiple different ways. It's a great way to experiment, isn't it?
It's fantastic, Pete. All right, so that pretty much brings us to the end of today's conversation. I know it was freewheeling. I know one of the things I like about this is there were no slides. It was just two people talking and people listening. And we've had some wonderful questions from our participants on. In fact, there are a lot more questions, but because of lack of time, we are not able to go into them. So thank you once again, Pete, and thank you everyone who's listening in. It's been an amazing conversation, and I hope it gives you a lot of value and something to think about, because we've covered a lot of topics in today's conversation.
We sure have. But thanks for having me. It's been really interesting.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much for joining.